What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast. We got a big game to talk about on Saturday in Fort Worth as the Sooners absolutely took apart TCU. Parker, that was as impressive a performance I think we've seen from Oklahoma from start to finish, and I'll emphasize the word finish, not just this season for sure, but I'll throw out there last season, probably since the Oklahoma State game, which ended up being a 34-16 win in Stillwater. Parker, start to finish, Sooners were very good yesterday.
Well, and defensively, John, I would say it's the best I've seen them on that side of the football since the Ohio State game back in 2017 in Columbus. I think this was really the culmination of everything that Alex Grinch has been trying to accomplish with this unit all season, and going back to last season as well. It definitely was the best performance of his regime in the year plus that he's been the defensive coordinator in Norman. We saw a lot of guys make a lot of big plays. It wasn't just one player that lifted the Sooners to victory on Saturday. It was very much a team effort, which you always love to see. And it bodes well as the Sooners continue to get into Big 12 play. It really bodes well for how they're going to stack up against some of their competitors across the conference.
I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. That's Parker Thune. He's in Norman. Thanks for listening again to the SI Sooners podcast, the Sports Illustrated Sooners podcast. Thanks for watching the SI Sooners podcast on my YouTube channel. We are a Sports Illustrated affiliate, and we are the #1 network at last check, #1 college network on the Sports Illustrated website network. It's just as simple as that. We do hard work. We do good work, and we were both in Fort Worth over the weekend. I'll be in Lubbock this weekend. Can't wait to bring you all the content. I guess if you're catching us on YouTube or if you're catching us on the podcast, whichever one it is, I would ask that you guys give us a comment, a like, a rating, or especially share us on social media. I think it helps a lot for small channels like us, for small podcasts like us. Okay, Parker, we're going to do a quick preview on next week's game at Texas Tech. We're going to do that in the third segment, and some interesting stuff going on with the Red Raiders, trust me. But we got to start today's pod with that beatdown we saw yesterday, man. Like I said, you and I were both in Fort Worth, both at Amon G. Carter. Some of us were a little warmer than others. Just saying. I hope you finally got the chill off your bones at some point last night. But it was impressive. Impressive performance by the Sooners. They ran the football. They threw it deep. They won the line of scrimmage. They played technique, I thought, in pass coverage. It's a nice change of pace. That did great on special teams. I thought Gabe Burkich tied the school record, obviously, with 4 field goals made. He could have had 5. This is one of those rare games, Parker, where I don't know what to say. I'm kind of speechless. I mean, I got nothing to really critique. And I say that with all seriousness. Most games, we've seen Oklahoma, play to a certain standard. There is an OU football, a Sooner standard, and it's pretty high. The OU standard is pretty high. We have seen it a lot, and they've played great a lot, but we find ourselves, in my opinion, viewing OU football a lot of times through that lens of that standard. Well, why didn't they score on every possession? Why did they have to punt? Why did they turn the ball over? Why couldn't they cover the tight end? Why did they have so many penalties? Why couldn't they block better? Why did he miss that field goal? But yesterday, Parker, man, I really mean this, and I don't know how good TCU is exactly, but OU checked all the boxes. They played very well in just about every phase of the game. How maybe refreshing was that to come out of a game and say they did. They checked all the boxes.
Yeah, John, and the adjective that I would use is they steamrolled TCU. They really did. I mean, that's a perfect adjective for the game that we saw, or a perfect verb, I suppose. But that's what it was. It was a steamrolling because the Sooners didn't have any big plays down the field on the offensive side of the football. They didn't generate any turnovers on defense. Special teams didn't do anything that would wow you outside of Marvin Mims' one nice punt return in the third quarter. But the Sooners just played consistently excellent football for 60 minutes, and they didn't need to be spectacular. They just stayed out of their own way, which they hadn't done thus far in 2020. TCU did not bring their A game. They looked sloppy all game. Max Duggan just didn't show up. The Horned Frogs were overmatched start to finish, but I thought what was really crucial for Oklahoma is that they took advantage of the opportunities that TCU presented them to run away with that football game. Because, and I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, in the Iowa State game and the Kansas State game, the Cyclones and the Wildcats didn't beat the Sooners. The Sooners beat themselves. Oklahoma had two very winnable contests there, and they let them get away. And that could have happened again yesterday against TCU. It very well could have, especially in that second quarter when it looked like for a second Max Duggan had that long touchdown pass to Blair Conright that would have put the Horned Frogs within 3 points, and you're sitting there and it's, well, here you go again. That kind of a mentality. I think that's how Alex Grinch put it in his post-game press conference. But the touchdown gets overturned. The Sooners force the defensive stop, get the ball back after the punt, and from there really shut the Horned Frogs down, only allowed that garbage time touchdown in the second half. And so start to finish, Oklahoma absolutely steamrolled TCU, and it was not flashy. It was not eye-popping. It maybe wasn't even eye-catching to a lot of people. But in the end, Oklahoma did exactly what they had to do to come away with a convincing victory in Fort Worth against a very scrappy and an always tough TCU team.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think, TCU, obviously you look at them, they're 1-3. If you look at their schedule, like OU, they beat Texas in a close game, and like OU, they lost to Iowa State and they lost to Kansas State. So there's a lot of straight comparison there. That whole transitive property thing, I think it's usually pretty completely, utterly worthless. I do. But in this case, when literally the only opponents that you've played, the only teams that you can measure yourself against are the same exact teams that your latest opponent has also played, same teams, I think transitive property actually works. And I think when you line up Oklahoma and TCU side by side, like we saw on Saturday, I think now you can definitively say that Oklahoma, yes, obviously is much better than TCU, 33-14. TCU, I think they've got a pretty good team. I'm with you. I think they played like crap. They didn't bring their A game, but I think they've got good players, and Oklahoma just absolutely outclassed them yesterday. I'm going to tell you what surprised me about yesterday, Parker, but first I want to know, what did you like most about the way Oklahoma played? What maybe single element of the game jumped out to you the most against TCU?
Well, they didn't over-pursue on defense, John, and the one play that I point to, it was at the end of the third quarter when TCU drew up a screenplay on 3rd and 12 to Zach Evans, their 5-star recruit, highest-rated recruit in the Gary Patterson era, and Woody Washington had Zach Evans one-on-one there. It was either Woody Washington was going to make the tackle or Zach Evans was going to get that first down. And Washington locked down, stood his ground, brought Evans down after a 5-yard gain, and TCU punted. Again, it goes back to the fact, John, that Oklahoma did not beat themselves. It would have been real easy for Washington to go for the football there, try to punch it out, maybe try to make a big hit. But no, he just dug his heels in the turf and brought down TCU's outstanding freshman running back. And it's those kinds of plays that we saw over and over and over again yesterday from so many guys on the Oklahoma defense, John. It wasn't just one player making these plays repeatedly. We saw Marcus Stripling get his first sack of the season. We saw Corey Roberson get his first sack of the season. John Michael Terry got plenty of snaps and recorded quite a few tackles. And the secondary, for the most part, I think Buki Radley-Hiles, again, was not that impressive to me. But for the most part, the secondary, highlighted by Washington, really had a strong all-around performance. And so I think even though the Sooners didn't force a turnover, and we know that's what Alex Grinch wants more than anything else, even though they didn't force a turnover, like I said, it was probably the best defensive performance that I've seen from the Sooners in 3 years. And I've watched every single one of those games for 3 years because time and time again, Oklahoma simply did what they needed to do to make sure that TCU wasn't moving the ball down the field on them. They did what they had to do to force punts, to force the TCU offense to stagnate and get Max Duggan off the field. And that's going to be the recipe for success for Oklahoma the rest of the way.
Yeah, you're right. Tackling the ball carrier, that's called winning football. That's what teams like Alabama and Clemson do. That's what teams like LSU did last year. Tulsa's doing that this year in the AAC. You're seeing Oklahoma State do that. Tackle the ball carrier. That's all you got to do. I'll tell you what surprised me most, Parker, was when I looked at the stat sheet after the game. TJ Pledger finished the day with 122 yards rushing. It was second straight, obviously, 100-yard performance. He popped the long one, I think, in the third quarter, 25-yarder. But he averaged 5.5 yards a carry against a TCU defense that historically is pretty good at stopping the run. Not necessarily this year, I know. They're a little bit down this year defensively, but historically, they don't give up much. So to average 5.5, to go for 122, pretty impressive. But here's the thing. I think I saw something out of Pledger these last two games that you can't really see out of somebody until they actually do it. You can think they can do it. You can surmise that possibly they have it in them. But here's the deal. You don't know if a guy gets better the more he gets the football unless he gets the football a lot. We saw that against Texas. We saw him better in the second half against Texas and in the overtime and in the fourth quarter. We saw him yesterday get better as the game went on. The more he gets the football, the better he is. You can't practice that. You can't say, okay, TJ, we're going to run you 28 times in practice today to see if you're better at the end of practice than you are at the beginning. That's not how it works. He's a guy that, I don't know, maybe runs a little tentative early in games, like he's trying to avoid contact, trying to look for the hole and find the hole and hit the big one. But it's like after he gets hit a few times, he suddenly gets really confident and starts running harder, starts breaking those tackles, starts inviting the contact. He's got good vision, I think. He's small and he's powerful. But his number one attribute to me is his balance. When he gets hit, especially late in games, because I think his fitness level's pretty high, he tends to bounce off those guys, and that's that late game workhorse that late game workhorse thing is, like I said, you can't do it in practice. You have to see it in games, and who knows if you got a guy that can do it in games until he does it. First quarter he had 23 yards. Second quarter he had 10 yards. Then the third quarter he had 45, and the fourth quarter he has 44. So yeah, this is a guy that he responds when you give him the football in the second half. The question I would have now, Parker, moving forward, starting with the Texas Tech game, is he going to be RB1? Is he going to be the starting running back? Because we hear on Twitter just a few minutes ago before we started recording this podcast, Ramondre Stevenson's mother, gets on Twitter and says the following. This will be our first Halloween not decorating the house and giving away Halloween treats to the neighborhood kids. Instead, my husband and I will be in Lubbock, Texas. I will be cheering loud and proud, all caps, while my husband, on the other hand, being the calm and quiet one. I don't even think we need to read between the lines on that one, Parker. It sounds like Ramondre Stevenson has been freed and will be playing for the Sooners. How much time you think he gets Saturday against Texas Tech?
Well, it's tough to say, John, because not only was Pledger really strong the past couple of weeks, but Seth McGowan has definitely shown that he's capable of handling 10 to 15 touches at least out of the backfield per game and doing quite a bit with them. And so it'll be interesting to see how Lincoln Riley balances those three guys. I do expect that Stevenson will get a decent amount of carries, and I really do think that pound for pound, he's the best back in that backfield, and by season's end, he's more than likely going to emerge as the guy that is outpacing both Pledger and McGowan 4 touches in the backfield. But again, it's his first game back. There's going to be a reacclimation period. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So in the here and now, I'm not sure how much of an impact Stevenson has on Saturday against Texas Tech, but you look ahead to November and December beyond that, Ramondre Stevenson is going to be the one collecting the vast majority of the carries out of the Oklahoma backfield.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is you saw Seth McGowan, like you said, back from concussion. That's good. You saw Chris Murray come in, the UCLA transfer, at offensive line. He got some snaps starting in the third quarter. I don't think anybody's going to lose their job anytime soon with Chris Murray back, but, my point is you're getting players, you're getting depth, you're getting playmakers at a really good time of the season. Sooners are back up to number 24 this week in the AP Top 25, so they're back in the poll. All they need to do now to climb is win football games. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, was the Oklahoma defense really that good, or was that a mirage? Trade Pros Heat and Air in Oklahoma City. Whether you just need service or a mini split for your home office, studio, or man cave, or if you're finally ready to upgrade to a more efficient train system for your entire home, get a free estimate from Trade Pros for all your heating and air needs. Trade Pros earned a Best of 2020 award from Home Advisor and has nothing but 5-star reviews on Google. Go to TradeProsOKC.com or call 405-675-0176, or just book your appointment on Facebook. Trade Pros, that's one word, Trade Pros Heat and Air. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Find Parker on Twitter at Parker Thune, Thune, and I am at John E. Hoover. Parker's also on Instagram. Check him out at Parker Thune. I'm over on Facebook as well. I've got like a half a dozen Facebook pages, but you can find the good one at John E. Hoover Media. And our website is sisooners.com, allsooners.com as well. It's all free. No memberships needed. No subscriptions. No credit cards. Just jump in there and follow SI Sooners. Just click the follow button. That way you'll know when we post new content, which we did, by the way, yesterday from Fort Worth 8 times. I counted 8 times. We posted 8 stories. Plus we did a post-game video wrap-up talking about the game. So hop on there, allsooners.com. The video version of this podcast is on my YouTube channel. That's at John Hoover Media. And don't forget, if you are watching that YouTube channel, I'm sorry. Nothing I can do about it. It eventually is going away. I don't know when, so please don't ask. I don't know when. It's a Google thing, and Google's bigger than like half the world, so we just have to be patient. I need you guys to subscribe to my other YouTube channel, which is right here. Pretty soon, this will be the only one where I post, so help me out. Subscribe. Okay, Parker, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time believing that what I saw on Saturday from the Oklahoma defense was not entirely a mirage. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. TCU's leading rusher finished with 20 yards. Max Duggan was not a threat running the football, which is shocking. He did have a 34-yard run, but other than that, they completely bottled him up for a net of 18 yards. He did have 276 yards passing, but he got that on 25 completions. Almost all of them were short. Their leading receiver only had 70 yards, Tay Barber. There weren't many missed tackles. I mean, there was one really big one, obviously. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But they swarmed. Oklahoma's defense swarmed. They gang tackled. They flew to the football. Everywhere that there was a TCU ball carrier, there were 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 Sooners. TCU averaged only 3 yards a carry in the run game. So my question is this. Was that the real Oklahoma defense? Was that kind of more what they're capable of doing? I've said it before. I like TCU's team. I think they've got some good players, and who knows, they'd probably be better off if your guy J.D. Spielman would have played, obviously. But all those freshman running backs will be better next year. Yes, Duggan will continue to grow. But was that performance more about the TCU offense, or was it more about the Oklahoma defense?
Well, I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, the final score is as much an indictment on the way TCU played as it is a credit to the way Oklahoma played. And, we've talked about it, John. TCU just didn't show up. They really didn't. From the get-go, Oklahoma was the better team. And when you look at what those two teams had accomplished coming into the game, both of them had beaten Texas, and both of them had lost to Kansas State and Iowa State. And so, on paper, these two teams were very evenly matched. It just didn't look like that from the very outset on Saturday. Oklahoma trumped TCU in all 3 facets of the game, and TCU just never could seem to get in a rhythm. And I think that's what impressed me maybe the most about the Sooner defense is the fact that not only were they really solid in tackling, not only were they really solid in coverage for the most part, but I think more broadly, they simply didn't allow Duggan and the offense to establish a rhythm. And when you do that in the first half of a game, you're more often than not going to have success in the second half. I understand that hasn't necessarily been the pattern for the Sooners over the first half of the season, but it was pretty clear that TCU got demoralized pretty quickly. Once Oklahoma staked themselves to that 17-0 lead, you had the touchdown pass overturned in the second quarter that would have brought the Horned Frogs within 3 points. And then from there, it just didn't really seem like TCU had any drive to get back in the game. And so, while you take the good and you credit the Sooners for it, you also got to acknowledge that TCU did not show up for this game. And they had their opportunities to climb back in. Oklahoma, I would argue, in that second quarter gave them plenty of opportunity to climb back in. They didn't take advantage of it. Oklahoma played a good game, but yes, this is not necessarily the beginning of a new trend for the Oklahoma defense. We need to see them reaffirm this performance next week against Texas Tech, an offense that is streaky but really, really dangerous when they're hot. And then you look ahead in November, you got Oklahoma State on the docket, and that's going to be a definite challenge, especially with 2 of the most talented skill position players in the country, Chuba Hubbard at running back, Tylan Wallace at wide receiver, that the Oklahoma Sooners are going to have to contend with.
Yeah, if you look back at the game, TCU had that one drive for a touchdown, 75 yards. And if not for that crazy missed tackle by Justin Broyles, where he kind of actually knocked Talan Turner-Yell off the tackle of Pro Wells, and Pro Wells goes for 47 yards. If they don't have that play, that drive goes nowhere too, and we might actually be talking about a shutout. I'm serious. Get this. TCU's offensive possessions, other than that one, okay, they were just brutal. 20 yards, 18 yards, 5 yards, 27 yards, 30 yards, 5 yards, 27 yards, 4 yards, and 9 yards. And, of course, at the end, garbage time, you mentioned it earlier, they go for 82 yards. They drive down for a touchdown in garbage time. I think if that first score never happens, in other words, if Broyles and Turner-Yell make that tackle, Grinch and those guys are probably playing things a little differently on that garbage time drive to maybe preserve the shutout. Maybe their mindset right there is keep the shutout, and then they play it completely different. Can you imagine, Parker, if Oklahoma were to get a shutout in a Big 12 road game, what the narrative would be this year about the OU defense?
Well, it would certainly be a statement. And you're right. The Sooners, as we've seen the last few games, you look at the Iowa State game, the Kansas State game, really even the Texas game, just a couple plays. If they turn in the Sooners' favor, you're maybe talking about a completely different ball game. And so, yeah, it's not out of the question that Grinch and the boys could have shut out TCU. But at the end of the day, that's a performance that they'll take 10 times out of 10. Because as several of the players reiterated in postgame, John, when the defense is holding the opponent to 14 points, Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley's offenses are going to win a lot of football games.
Absolutely right. I think TCU only had 60 offensive plays, 60. So if you look at the OU's defensive numbers, nobody had a bunch of tackles. I think Buki led the team with 9 tackles, and honestly, I think he had like half of that on the first 2 drives because they kept picking on him. They kept going right at him. But yeah, the linebackers I thought were really good. I thought Deshaun White, Brian Asamoah, John Michael Terry, and David Agwebu, I think they really stood out. They had a great game. Nick Bonito finished with just 2 tackles, but I thought he was really active when he wasn't, quote-unquote, mugging Duggan, meaning spying. 10 players contributed a tackle for a loss, so that's when you know you're winning a lot of those one-on-one matchups. I thought the D-line was good. Winfrey and Ellison and Stokes on the interior were good. Jordan Kelly was very good on the interior as well. 3 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. The DBs, as we mentioned earlier, Parker, were not, I repeat, not a disaster. What did you see from those guys yesterday?
Yeah, John, the defensive front 7 played really, really well, and we touched on that earlier. But the linebacker core was really solid all day. I was even more impressed with the defensive tackles and the defensive ends, the guys up in the trenches. And you mentioned, or I guess I mentioned earlier, Corey Roberson getting a sack, Marcus Stripling getting a sack. Perrion Winfrey played really, really well yet again. Nick Bonito was getting after it. Grinch even dialed up some defensive back blitzes. I tell you what, John, this is one thing I noticed looking at the tape from yesterday's game, and I didn't notice it in the moment, but in hindsight, it was so indicative of how the game flowed. On TCU's very first offensive play, if you go back and you watch the film, the very first play that the Horned Frogs ran, every single member of the Oklahoma rush, they had 5 rushers on the play, every single one of them beat their assignment on the offensive line. Every single one. And it wasn't a screen. It wasn't a play that was designed to get the offensive lineman downfield. If you go back and you look at the first play that TCU ran from scrimmage, Max Duggan ends up throwing the ball away, being pursued by all 5 members of the Sooner defense that were assigned to rush on the play. And that, to me, set the tone right off the bat. And Duggan he never really had time in the pocket. He was constantly under duress from the Oklahoma rushers, and it didn't matter who they threw out there. Jordan Kelly contributed. John Michael Terry, I mentioned earlier as well. There were so many guys that were in on the action for Oklahoma, and every single one of them stepped in, took advantage of their moment, and made a big play.
Yeah, and the DBs were solid. Like you said, Woody was good. Woody Washington, Talan Turner-Yell was his usual steady self, in my opinion. Trey Norwood came in, did some decent things. Jeremiah Cradell came in, had 3 tackles as Buki's backup. I guess Buki got tired of chasing that big tight end down the field. Parker, at one point in the second half, I tweeted this. It was 30-7, but we know what a lead means to this Oklahoma football team in the fourth quarter. In other words, I fully expected TCU to mount some kind of comeback even when it was 30-7. Early in the fourth quarter, Sooners are trying to protect that lead. They had 5 backups in there at defensive back. They had DJ Graham, Trey Norwood, Justin Broyles, Jeremiah Cradell, and Woody Washington. I thought that was a real statement on what Alex Grinch thinks about, number one, those guys. I think he believes in them, as well as his insistence on getting them some time to develop. Like, you're not going to – you can sit here like he did all of last year. You can sit here and say, we don't have any safety depth. You're never going to have any safety depth if you don't play any other safeties other than Pat Fields and Delaren Turner-Yell, and that's what he did last year. Well, this year he's not saying that because he's saying we're going to try and get these other guys some time. I don't care what the depth situation is. I don't care how bad they practice. We need to get them on the field. So that's a little bit of a change on Alex Grinch's part. Plus his desire maybe to give the guys that you would call the frontline guys, the starters, give them a break. I think you saw those guys wear down last year because they didn't get a lot of breaks. He didn't do that. He didn't give them breaks last year, and he hasn't done it really before this year, before Texas and now TCU. And I think we can say, Parker, at this point with those young DBs, it's happening.
That certainly is. And, Grinch mentioned a couple of weeks ago in the aftermath of that Iowa State loss, he said one of the things he was encouraged by was the fact that Oklahoma was getting to a point where they could start to rotate a lot more defensively, and that was something that he really wanted to do. And so, on the one hand, you want to keep your best 11 guys out there as much so as you can. But I think also 4 games into this season, rather, it wasn't really clear who those best 11 were for the Sooners. And also, there's something to be said for keeping guys fresh, getting a multitude of guys some opportunities, and seeing who can step up. And we saw DJ Graham, the true freshman cornerback, get some second half snaps yesterday. Jordan Kelly saw extended action for really the first time all year. I know I just mentioned him, but he played really well up front at the defensive tackle position. And think about this, John. They're still playing without Ronnie Perkins. When Ronnie Perkins comes back, that defense only gets even better. That front seven only gets even better. The pass rush only gets even better. And how much more effective is Oklahoma going to be in pursuing the passer and forcing him to make decisions under duress with Ronnie Perkins on the other side of that Oklahoma offensive line opposite Nick Bonito?
Yeah, if Ronnie Perkins gets back. There seems to be some question. We shall see starting this week in Lubbock, Texas. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, some big recruiting news we're going to hit on, and we're going to look ahead a little bit to Texas Tech. Exactly what is up with these Red Raiders?
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the Sports Illustrated Sooners podcast. Parker, we had some big recruiting news over the weekend, like at 2:37 in the afternoon on Saturday, actually, minutes after the Sooners finished off TCU. Edmond Santa Fe's Talan Shetran, arguably the number one player in the state in 2022, one of the top receivers in the country in 2022. Not a big surprise, but still huge news, commits to the Sooners.
Yeah, Talan didn't waste a whole lot of time, did he, John? That game went final and he hit send tweet. So it was a big day on multiple fronts for Oklahoma, not just getting the win against TCU, but getting a phenomenal talent in the 2022 class. With Talan Shetran's commitment, Oklahoma just added Luther Burden a couple weeks back. They had Jordan Hudson, who committed in July. That is three of the top 15 wide receivers in the 2022 class already committed to Oklahoma. That's not 2021. That's 2022. These guys are juniors right now. How much more impressive is that recruiting class for Lincoln Riley and the Sooners going to be a year from now when the 2022 class, they're all seniors and getting to the point where the majority of them are ready to ink their collegiate letters of intent. And so for right now, with where the Sooners sit, you look at the 2021 class, and that's an unfinished product as well. The Sooners will continue to pick up a few more guys, and you think about Billy Bowman at the top of that list. There will be more 2021 commits down the road for Oklahoma. But the fact that they're already loading up on offensive weaponry in the class of 2022 is huge. Because think about this. In 2022, if Caleb Williams is playing quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners, first off, that's outstanding in and of itself. To have a guy the caliber of Caleb Williams coming in to play quarterback for you, that's a step up from just about anybody. I would argue Williams is a step up from Rattler, and I've said that. But the fact that Williams might be throwing to a core of wide receivers that includes Marvin Mims, Jalen Conyers, Jaden Hazelwood, Trajan Bridges, Theo Weiss, Mario Williams, Jalil Farouk, Cody Jackson, Luther Burden, Jordan Hudson, and Talan Shetran. John, those are, what did I just count 11? Was that 11 players that are big-time recruits or already big-time contributors for the Sooners that might be offensive targets for Caleb Williams in 2022? I mean, that is a stacked deck that Lincoln Riley is playing with. And he'll get more, too. He's going to get more. You know he will.
That's unbelievable. When you put it over the course of the 2019 class, the 2020 class, the 2021, and the 2022 class, some of those guys are going to transfer because they're not getting the snaps they think they should get. Some of those guys are going to try to go pro. So they won't have them all, but the way you just said it, it's just stunning. It's obscene. It's not fair is what it is. It looks like literally it's not fair. It's like they've got not just the best receiver core in the country, but maybe the best receiver core in any college football team that's ever existed, with the possible exception of LSU last year. I know that's a lot of pressure on guys who are currently juniors in high school, but yeah, if you go by the rankings, if you go by the press clippings, so to speak, wow. Parker, you've seen Talan Shetran with your own eyes. You've been down there on the field evaluating him. What kind of player are they getting?
I tell you what, John, my comp since the time that I went out and watched Talan Shetran on the field at Edmond Santa Fe, I've compared him to a young CeeDee Lamb because I really think he has that kind of potential. He's 6'3", 185 pounds, has so much room on that frame to add muscle and add strength. He's already got track star speed. He's got elite ball skills as a junior. This is a guy that, make no mistake, can do what Marvin Mims has done this year for Oklahoma, come in as a true freshman and be a big-time contributor and make big-time plays. Talan Shetran is a special kid, and I know Luther Burden gets more hype, but I tell you what, if you're looking at those three wideouts in the 2022 class and trying to figure out which one probably has the highest NFL ceiling, I think it's Talan Shetran. I really do. He's got the most college-ready skill set right now, and he's really competitive too. And competitiveness will take you a long way. And when you think about the guy that's going to be throwing him the ball in Caleb Williams, who's also as competitive as they come, that's a tantalizing recipe for the Oklahoma offense when you look down the road.
You said a mouthful. Wow. Parker, I don't know how closely our listeners or viewers, in some cases, you YouTubers, follow the rest of the Big 12 on a week-to-week basis, but I think it's going to surprise some people to hear that Texas Tech seems to have moved on from the Alan Bowman era at quarterback. Maybe, possibly. We'll see. The guy who was so good as a true freshman, the guy who has lost major chunks of 2 seasons, if you think about it, because of serious injuries, collapsed lungs. I mean, are you serious with this? If I remember right, I think it was Curtis Bolton that hit him on the goal line and partially collapsed a lung a couple of years ago in Lubbock, or OU might have lost to the Red Raiders that night anyway. He's the backup now. He's the backup. He got dinged up a couple of times this year already, and he's gotten replaced a couple of times by Henry Colombi. Okay, the team apparently has just been better with Colombi at quarterback. Matt Wells said it. He said the team responded better when the kid came in against Kansas State, rallied the team for a couple of touchdowns. I think Iowa State roughed them both up a little bit, but after Bowman threw 3 picks against Texas, he got dinged against K-State. He wasn't real good against Iowa State. Colombi comes in on Saturday against West Virginia as the starter, goes 22 of 28, 169 yards and a touchdown, rushes for 40 yards and a touchdown, and leads the Red Raiders to one of their biggest wins in a while, certainly their biggest win so far this year over the Mountaineers. West Virginia came in that game with a little bit of momentum. So what a job by them to turn things around kind of mid-season. He's a junior. He's a transfer from Utah State. He played for Wells out there. He backed up Jordan Love for 2 years. So he's a guy that might be the future, and I mean the immediate future, like the next 5 games in 2021 season for Texas Tech. And when you're kind of reinventing the offense a little bit at mid-season, Parker, you got a ranked team coming in for a night game, Halloween night at that. Yeah, things could get interesting for this Oklahoma defense, Parker, depending on what Texas Tech looks like Saturday night.
That's very true, John. And I liked what you mentioned about Columbi, bringing up the fact that he was a Utah State transfer. He's a guy that Matt Wells recruited. And you think about Alan Bowman, that's a Cliff Kingsbury recruit, right? And there's a lot to be said about the quarterback-head coach relationship and the chemistry there. And the fact that Columbi is a guy that Wells handpicked and followed him to Texas Tech. I think that bodes very well for the Red Raiders in terms of what their offense can be down the road. And obviously, Bowman's a talented kid. Like, if this is the end of the line for him at Texas Tech, he's going to head somewhere and be very successful. But for right now, I think Columbi, as Matt Wells said, is probably the better guy for the job, just given what Bowman has been through, where the Red Raiders are as a team right now. And if the team really responds better to Columbi at quarterback, then you got to roll with the kid. And it helps that he's got one of the most talented wideouts in the country in TJ Vasher on the outside, got a tremendous running back in Sir Roderick Thompson. And so the Red Raiders aren't going to go down quietly this Saturday in Lubbock. The Sooners will get their money's worth going to Jones AT&T Stadium.
If you look back last week, Tech beat West Virginia 34-27 in Lubbock. Okay, things are getting ready to get weird now. Are you ready? The winning touchdown was actually a defensive scoop and score midway through the fourth quarter. Can we talk about the Tech defense for a second? We can talk about the quarterback all we want, but Tech basically beat West Virginia with defense. West Virginia's last five possessions, they had 3 punts, lost that fumble, and then the final drive, they got the ball back with like 42 seconds left and basically just ran out of time. Got to, I think, the 38-yard line, but had no chance. So it makes you wonder if maybe Matt Wells and our old friend Keith Patterson, formerly of TU, formerly of my alma mater, East Central, Keith Patterson, the defensive coordinator, makes you wonder if they're not getting some things done on defense in Lubbock finally, Parker.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about it, though, John. Does that say more about Texas Tech's defense or more about the state of West Virginia's offense? Because let's not forget, this is a Texas Tech team that surrendered 63 points to Sam Ehlinger and the Longhorns earlier in the month. So it may be a case of the fact that, okay, Texas Tech is starting to see some progression on the defensive side of the football. They may have just channeled lightning in a bottle for a couple of quarters. And West Virginia is not a powerhouse of an offense. They're just not. A Neil Brown coached team is not going to beat you with the high-powered, up-tempo scoring attack. It's just not going to happen. And so I'm not necessarily buying that Texas Tech is capable on the defensive side of the football of keeping up with the Sooners. I think they're going to make their hay on the offensive side, and they're going to want to engage Oklahoma in a shootout. And you think about the great games that have been played between the Sooners and the Red Raiders in Lubbock over the years. It's always those shootouts, right? You don't have to look any further than 2016 when Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes had their duel for the ages, or in 2018 when the Sooners barely survived with Kyler Murray at the helm against a really, really motivated Tech team behind Alan Bowman, who was then a true freshman at the quarterback position. So these are the kind of games that we get between Oklahoma and Texas Tech, and I think it's the kind of game that we're in for yet again this Saturday night.
I'm glad you mentioned Baker. Big win for him today. Threw the game-winning touchdown pass, 21 consecutive completions, set the franchise record. Can't wait to read Caroline's story on Baker and all the Sooners in the NFL this weekend on tomorrow's website, SI Sooners. Parker, you mentioned that game. The last couple times Oklahoma went out there, it's been crazy. 51-46 2 years ago. The one you mentioned, 66-49. Through 4 years ago, it was 42-30. If you think about it, the last time it was really easy for Oklahoma out there, actually, if you think about it, it's kind of the only time that it's been easy for them out there. It was 2012. OU won 41-20. They lost in 2009. They lost in 2007. They lost in 2005. Kind of lost because of that crazy replay stuff. I call shenanigans on those guys. Jason White and Kewan Jones and those guys would tell you, I think, that the 2003 team, which was almost impossible to beat, remember that? They go out to Lubbock, and the offensive line gets exposed a little bit. 56-25 was the score, but that was anything but easy. That was the last game of the year, the game that the offensive line, like I said, got roughed up. Kansas State watched that game, and they came out 2 weeks later, remember, 2003 in the Big 12 championship game, and shocked the Sooners 35-7. Bill Snyder said they took a lot from what Texas Tech did that night defensively. So it's never, ever, ever easy to win at Texas Tech. And if you think Oklahoma's rolling along right now, which, after a couple of wins, one of them 4 overtimes, one of them at TCU, but all of them they've spent a month away from home. It's never going to be easy. And even winning out there when you do, Parker, it can take a toll on you. So, it's only Sunday, but it's worth asking. This Oklahoma team is growing up, as Lincoln Riley said, I think, right before your eyes. But we have to ask the question, are these Sooners equipped to go into Lubbock and win a football game on Halloween night?
And it's a very, very interesting question, John, because on the one hand, you did see a lot of growth on Saturday. On the other hand, you're still looking at a very, very young team. And I'm sure the Sooners would love to have Ronnie Perkins back this Saturday to be that emotional leader going into a hostile environment where they've struggled in the past. But who knows? We don't know what Perkins' status is right now, and we don't know how the Sooners are going to respond to the success of their 33-14 victory over TCU, because what happened the last time they had a win that convincing? Well, they followed up the shutout against Missouri State in the season opener by blowing a 21-point lead late in the second half and losing 38-35 at home to Kansas State. So things can get dicey, John. I would expect things to get dicey. Nothing is going to come easy for Oklahoma this Saturday.
Our next podcast drops Wednesday, and we need your help for the mailbag segment. That's when we run our mailbags on Wednesday. So on Twitter, at John E. Hoover or at Parker Thune, listen to the SI Sooners podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts, or on your Amazon-enabled device. Just say, Alexa, play the SI Sooners podcast. Or go to allsooners.com and click on the player and listen on your phone, your tablet, your computer. You can always watch the video version over on my YouTube channel. That's John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.